Hi, and thank you for joining me for my new shiur on the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. Now, one of the most important questions any of us should ask when beginning to study the Yad HaChazaka of the Rambam is, what version are we using? Because honestly, editions like the Vilna have been so heavily censored and corrupted that it's made the task of understanding many of the halachot very difficult. And even the Frankel edition, that was till a few years back the most accurate text of them all, has also been proven erroneous and tampered with. And really, this was the fault of the Jews of the time. Not to mention that most of the censors were Jews themselves. No, friends, the problem is that the Jewish community as a whole didn't value the Mishneh Torah enough to guard it from corruption, unfortunately. Especially in places like Europe. Heck, we even see how the mystical Jews today try to paint the Rambam into a mystic himself also. People who are uncomfortable with the rational Torah truth, who feel that they're doing humanity a great favor by twisting the words and ideas of Maimonides, to the point that places that did revere the work, like Yemen today, has the most accurate manuscripts in existence. So I'm going to be teaching these shiurim from the most accurate edition of the Mishneh Torah to date, which was based on those ancient Yemenite manuscripts and were compiled and corrected by the late, great Rabbi Kapach of blessed memory. Okay, today we're going to begin with the Hakdama, the introduction. By the way, does anyone know why the work was known as the Mishneh Torah? Mishneh, the second Torah. Well, friends, the reason this is so is because when Maimonides wrote this great work, his intention was for every other book of Jewish law and rabbinic law to be closed once and for all, so that there would only remain the 5 books of Moses, Torah Shebektav, and the Mishneh Torah, Torah Shebal Peh. Now, this is Torah Shebal Peh as understood as what's known as Halacha LeMoshe Sinai, what Moses received on Sinai apart from the written law, and the decrees of the Beit Din HaGadol, the Sanhedrin. And the reason I have to make the distinction is that sometimes, as we will just read in a minute, Torah Shebal Peh does not include the decrees of the Sanhedrin, or what's known as rabbinic law. But in retrospect, they're usually lumped together as something perhaps not divine, but still binding on all of Israel, just like Halacha LeMoshe Sinai and Torah Shebektav. Okay? Starting off, Aleph. Kol ha-mitzvot shenitnu lo leMoshe b'Sinai. All the commandments that Moses received on Mount Sinai, beferushan nitnu. They were given with their interpretation. And here we see the Rambam really just explaining what I just finished explaining. I mean, here he's starting off his great work with the basis, what's considered Halacha LeMoshe b'Sinai, the teachings that were given on Mount Sinai, apart from Torah Shebektav. It reads on, Shenemar ve'akna lecha et luchot ha'even vecha Torah vecha mitzvah. And I will give you the 2 luchos, the 2 tablets of stone, and the Torah and the mitzvah. Now, I'm not sure why it uses the commandment in the singular form, mitzvah, instead of mitzvot. And I really don't see any other meforshim explain it. But here the Rambam is letting us know that this is all that was received. And that's it. Now, this is very important to know, especially, friends, when today we see people trying to say silly things that ideas contained in corrupt works like the Zohar were also given on Mount Sinai and are thus in some way applicable and authoritative in our daily Jewish life. And how do we know this? Because it explicitly says, it states it right here, that anything that could ever have been considered oral law or Halacha LeMoshe Sinai could only be an explanation to a law found in the written Torah itself, like how do you make tefillin or how do you slaughter cattle, not the complexity of God or the ideas like reincarnation or virtually anything that's called practical Kabbalah today. No, friends, this is just a way to sneak outside ideas into Judaism. In other words, it goes against directly the prohibition we find in the Torah. Lo tosef alav velo tigra mimenu, that we shouldn't add or take away from it. But anyways, reading on. Torah, zo Torah shebektav, u'mitzvah, zo perusha. When it says Torah, it means the written Torah, Torah shebektav. And when it says mitzvah, it means its commentary or explanation. Which is why I never liked when people use the word Torah lightly nowadays. When they say Torah, they really mean everything that was written from the Chumash to the works of Rabbi Asher Meza. This, my friends, is not the Torah. Torah is only the 5 books, and everything else is secondary and regulated to commentary. Because the reason they call even their works Torah is to get you to submit to them. In other words, for power. And before I lose this thought, this is also telling us that both the written and the oral law was received from God, and that this is what a Jew must believe. And if he doesn't, we see that the Rambam writes in both his Yud Gimel Ikar Hemuna and also in Hilchos Mamrim that these people are not Jews. In Hilchos Mamrim, regarding the oral law, or people who deny the oral law, it states, Kal Elu Einan B'Chlal Yisrael, that these people are not part of Israel. Now, this is a very important principle to know, especially nowadays when virtually every Orthodox rabbi has lost his marbles. And also, you must also realize that many of the Jews who make up conservative and reform synagogues, people who typically deny the divine authorship of Torah Shebektav and Torah Shebal Peh, were former Orthodox Jews who learn and continue to learn Halacha and Gemara. You're probably asking, why would they continue to learn texts they don't really truly believe in? Well, that's not a problem in their mind. They're just learning the same way as an atheist as they learned when they were Orthodox in yeshiva. In other words, for no altruistic purpose at all. Actually, I think the Rambam speaks about this in Perek Helik in his Parashat Mishneh, the dangers of learning for the sake of learning and not for the sake of teaching. Reading on. Betzivanu lasot Torah, and he commanded us to do the Torah al pi ha-mitzvah, according to the mitzvah, to the oral tradition. U'mitzvah zo hi chanikret Torah Shebal Peh, and the mitzvah is called the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law. Now, what does this mean? That we should do the Torah Shebektav, according to the mitzvah that we just explained means the oral component that was received in Har Sinai. Does this mean, like many rabbis nowadays teach, that one cannot understand the written law without the rabbis? That if it wasn't for Rashi's Parish on the Chumash, we'd all be lost? Friends, it's exactly the opposite. To the point that the Rambam writes in his Egeret Rambam, I believe that it was his letter to his son, that he explicitly says that one should stay away from the Meforshim from France. And friends, I have no doubt that he was referring to Rashi and the later Tosafot in this area. Why? Because it states clearly that they do not understand Torah, but rather add to it. Heck, that's what Tosafot means. It means additions. He then tells his son, if you're looking for a commentator, stick with Ibn Ezra, because he explains the text from a wise and philosophical approach. And again, when the Rambam refers to the mitzvah, he's referring to the 30 laws that Moshe Rabbeinu received on Har Sinai, along with the Torah Shebektav, the written law, as he clearly explained in his Hakdama to his Parashat Mishneh. To the point that he even states regarding these Ora mitzvot, that you will not find anything about them in the Torah. In other words, they're not something we need some commentator to decipher or explain. No, friends. He states that although they are accompaniments to the existing mitzvot, we could never have extracted them through any of the principles of exegesis from the actual written text. And one chiddush of mine that I like to bring down when I teach this portion is that the oral law, Halacha LeMoshe Misinai, or whatever you want to call what was given to Moshe and Har Sinai apart from the written law, could never have contained any ethical laws, but rather only ceremonial or ritualistic ones. Why? Because that would have ultimately undermined the whole reason we believe in Torah in the first place, which is because it's a book of ethics that encourages peace and morality in the world. Seriously, do you think that it would keep a Karaite up at night thinking that the oral law only contained 30 ritualistic laws? Of course not. Their argument is and always has been that Rabbinic Jews claim that everything that the rabbis wrote, including the Talmud to the works of your Rebbe, was given to Moshe and Har Sinai. And friends, this is not what's being taught here. Not to mention that even rabbinic law, the words of Chazal, could never have included ethical or moral edicts, but only ritualistic ones, that were only there either to build up or confirm the ethical edicts within Torah Shebektav. Why? Because ritualistic laws are not as important as ethical laws. And friends, this notion drives modern day rabbis up the wall. And as students of Torah, we know that the ritualistic is only there to guard the ethical. In other words, do you really think it matters if someone waits 3 or 6 hours between basar b'chalav, between meat and milk? However, if Chazal came down and said that on Mondays you could murder and on Wednesdays you could steal, well, that would throw a whole wrench into the whole system. Friends, The problem is that Jews nowadays have become very relative when it comes to understanding the Taryag mitzvahs, thinking that all the mitzvahs are on the same level, which actually produces people who will just assume, well, if a commandment or all the commandments are on the same level, I'll just stock up on the easy ones like laying tefillin and saying brachas, and I'll be slack on the ethical ones like loving the ger and visiting the sick, because hey, it's all the same. Points are points. Idiots. Okay, bet, the second portion. Kol Torah, the whole Torah, Ketava Moshe Rabbeinu, was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, Kodem Sheyamut, before he died, Biktav Yado, by his hand, his own hand, he wrote it. Benatan Sefer Torah, Lechod Shevet Veshevet, and he gave a Torah scroll to every one of the tribes. Vesefer Echad, and one Torah scroll, Netanachu be'aron la'ed, he placed in the Ark of the Testimony. Shenemar, as it's written, Lakoach et Sefer HaTorah Chazeh, take this Sefer Torah, Besamten oto mitzad, and place it next to Aaron Brit Adonai Elohechem, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God. V'chaya sham becha la'ed, and it will be among you or in you as a testimony.